at the Law and Economics School at the London School of Economics and received his undergraduate degree from Harvard University. He now serves as an investment chairman of the $18 billion Illinois State University's retirement system, the second largest public pension here in Illinois. Craig also has been a very good friend of MBBI. He is one of the founding board members of the board of directors of MBBI, and he worked in sync with MBBI and was very critical and crucial in helping Illinois and MBBI gain the Illinois statute granting lien rights for business brokers. So it's my pleasure today to introduce Craig McCrohon and his discussion on money law. Thank you.
One of the challenges I had since Greg told me there were a lot of lawyers in the program, and that made more of the audience a little bit. He asked me what I was going to do to spice it up. He said, well, how about law and statistics? Is that going to be any better? What we're about to find out. So I'm talking about today trying to benchmark terms and conditions in M&A agreements. And I realize that not all of you work on M&A agreements, but your clients do, and certainly the brokers and intermediaries in the room do. So I think it's in all of our interest to understand this. It's at the very early stages of trying to apply some quantitative benchmarks to a legal process such as mergers and acquisitions, although it's been applied to many things. Now, in a way, what we've got is, does it work? A lot of it actually is driven by the whole big data trend, and of course the Moneyball, many of you are familiar with Moneyball. It's the concept of applying statistics to baseball, and actually in my capacity as investment chairman of the state fund, I was able to meet with Billy Beane and talk with him about it, and it was fascinating, just one-on-one, it was fascinating hearing him talk about the fundamental resistance that people get to trying to apply quantitative measures to things that are usually perceived as being very subjective and subject to professional discretion. In his case, he had to deal with a lot of scouts. Now, Barack Obama may not be the favorite guy in the room here, but I'll tell you one thing he does do really well is win elections. And just down the street, his campaign headquarters, how did he do it? A lot with data. It was a very data-centric campaign, and notwithstanding the catastrophe of the healthcare website, he was way ahead of the competition on data, and that helped them a lot. For economics, down the street over at University of Chicago, again, he has a lot of examples of how you can apply data to real-world problems we wouldn't have thought so before. And I have to say, the Republicans, of course, they caught up with Barack Obama on their data, and they'll be able to play that game. Just as in Moneyball, it really worked with Billy Beane. And Billy Beane will tell you this, told me this, that once the data gets out, then your advantage does go away. And one thing, it occurred to me when I was finishing this up, is this room actually, and the people in this room are related to a lot of the dataizing of the lower middle market. This is a picture of Shannon Pratt, and he's sort of the dean of valuation for smaller companies, and a lot of you are involved in that, a lot of you are about the certifications in that. So groups like this are actually in the vanguard of applying data that used to be applied at the big company level and getting it down to that smaller company level. So it is extremely appropriate that we talk about this topic with this group. Now, the legal stuff. There have been, in the last several years, several studies that have come out, and they take a look and they try to benchmark significant terms and conditions that you see in acquisition agreements. And I'll go into details as to what they are in a moment. So the first one, Kay Scholler, they came out with one, had about 77 agreements in that, covered a few years. That was pretty good. And then Houlihan Lokey, I don't know if anybody's seen that study. They come out every couple of years with a study. They've got about 100 agreements, plus or minus. If you see the Houlihan Lokey study, sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. About 100 agreements. The American Bar Association, sometimes you get 120, 150, 170 agreements depending on the year. It's about every 3 or 4 years to come out with something. The study we've got about 1,500 agreements. Fundamentally different, and why does it matter? Because, as I'll talk about later on, if you only have 100 agreements, and you have, let's say, 10 categories of sizes, and 10 different industries, theoretically, if you're looking for one industry and one size, you get one deal in that data study. It just doesn't tell you very much. You can't do much with that. It's like a car with a gas tank that's just too small. So, now, how do we take all those 1,500 agreements and slice and dice them and get them down to something that's relevant to talk about today? So we start with the agreements. There's about 1,000 terms in all these agreements, and many of you may have, lived with them. They're about, 50 to 70 pages a piece. So you see there's many terms you could elect to take, but you got to scale it down. So you look at critical terms, which I'll talk about. We've identified them. A lot of people in the room know about what the critical terms are in these agreements. And then, however, you have to think about what critical terms can you actually measure realistically. And that gets you down to the terms for the study. And you look at some critical economic terms, some measurable risk terms, measurable procedures, side agreements. It's not a lot if you want to get those high numbers. So, but to do that, you've got to make some decisions. And so see, it's a fairly restricted set of terms. You don't get the universe in what I'm talking about today. I'm just giving you a flavor of it. But we couldn't measure everything, and you wouldn't want me to either. Okay, you've got a couple of groups of terms, which we'll talk about, that kind of external terms. And this is what distinguishes a lot of our work, this study, from all the others, which is we look at exogenous variables, things that are economic variables, and try to correlate them with the legal terms. The size of the deal, the leverage of the parties, and sometimes you have to be a little clever about it. How do you determine leverage? Well, maybe it's the size of the company, the acquirer versus the revenues, or the size of the deal. There's ways you can do it. The industry. So the other studies don't do that much, so you really just can't learn that. A lot of what I'm talking about today is why looking at data is really good and it's valuable and it's going to be better. Absolutely. Today's sort of, think about this as day one. And in the future, this study will get better and better and better. Another piece is there's a lot of bad stuff out there. And so for those of you who encounter people who say, well, I looked at this study and it said, I can tell you right now, for sure, definitively, that all the other studies are, as Joe Biden would say, malarkey. They really don't tell you anything because they just group too many deals together, too many disparate things together. Now, so we look at also the deal terms. Now, just to give you a little bit of a flavor, so the 1,500 deals, this is a distribution of companies. See the prevalence of manufacturing, so that's big. We looked at this, by the way, and this correlates pretty well with the distribution of SIC codes in the SEC database and the SIC codes in the Department of Commerce, sort of the economy generally. So that's good. The deal sizes. So let's just hover here a little bit. The most common deal size is 25 million to 100 million. So it gives you kind of that middle market deal. See, there's a lot of small deals in there. I'd say of that group, some are kind of high tech, they're kind of weird deals, and about half of them are like real deals that you guys would be involved with, albeit on the smaller end. You can see there's some larger ones as well. Part of this is driven by the size of the reporting rules of the SEC. Acquirer sizes, again, about 100 million to 500 million is your top. This is driven a lot by the reporting, and then it gets smaller from there. Now, how would a public, one comment on where we get our deals, where we get our 1,500 deals. We get them from the SEC database. So it's public companies required to file, of course, 10Ks and any special reports, and they're required by law to file copies of agreements that are significant. Significant being roughly 5% of their revenues. That's pretty rough, but that's about it. So the other studies, some of them take those public deals, some of them take private deals. One of the obstacles is if you're taking private deals, there's confidentiality restrictions about correlating economics with the legal terms. Okay, a few definitions. I gave this presentation a couple of years ago on a panel, and some people came up to me afterwards and said, it was fine, but I don't work in the business all the time. Could you please explain what you're talking about before you get into the details? Fair enough, because we want to have as many of you kind of on board as we're looking for through lots and lots of graphs as possible. So for those of you who do deals all the time, a little bit of a refresher course, or you can check your iPhone now, that's okay. But you got to put it down when I'm done with this. For those who are new, put the iPhone down and look. So economic terms, what are they? Form of the payment, you got a promissory note, an escrow. Promissory note, this is when the seller, or when the buyer says, look, I'll instead of paying you $100, I'll give you $50 and a $50 note. So that's some people call it a buyer note, some people call it a seller note. And earn out, that's when, hey, I'll give you $50 today, and depending, hits milestones, I'll give you $50 in the future. Hold back, I'll give you $50 today, and I'm just gonna hold back $50 for a year. Sorry, that's it. And then stock, I'll give you $50 today, and I'll give you $50 worth of stock today. And you can, of course, mix and match. And then escrow, you can put the stock or the cash in escrow for a year, a day, whatever you want. Timing the payment, that will affect the first one, and the security is gonna be secured, unsecured. Now, risk. This is what we kind of think about. What are the things we can, an agreement is a lot like an insurance policy too. So it's indemnification, horribly ugly word, what is it? Bottom line, it's like a warranty, not exactly the same, but for this purpose, close enough. So for those of you who are new to deals, it's like you buy a car, that's a warranty. A big deal in M&A, which those of you who do deals know that. In fact, it's such a big deal for those of you who are new to the business. I'm going to walk us through in 10 seconds the important measurements of indemnification. You got a maximum amount. Again, buy a car, do I get all the money back if it's a lemon? Do I get some of the money back? That's the maximum at the top, threshold. What's the threshold? Sometimes I say, look, if I'm selling a company, don't call me if there's a $50 problem on a $100 million sale. I don't want to hear it. So they'll hit thresholds. Now that's sort of the amount, that's one dimension, and time is the other dimension. How long does it survive? That is, do you have forever? Is it like the warranty on your appliance? Is it forever? Is it 90 days? Is it a year? Whatever. These are really big deals. Okay. So the final thing, termination fees, that's one thing we can measure. We'll take a look at control. By that I mean non-competition. That's something we can kind of measure, tick off. Closing conditions, it's important. I don't think we won't have time to talk about those today. Dispute resolution, arbitration, litigation, whatever. Okay, let's take a look at some of the basics. By the way, for those of you who worked on deals, you gotta put the iPhone down, you gotta look at it. So we'll look at first some of the basic measures that kind of on an aggregate basis, and then we'll drill down after that. So I'm just giving you the basics here. So forms of consideration, these are non-cash consideration, by the way. So these are absolute numbers. Some of the slides will be percentages. These are absolute numbers. Sometimes they don't add up to 1,500 for lots of reasons. Some of the deals you kind of have to take out of the pool. So you can see lots of people use escrow, stock. Stock is huge. It's a public companies after all. Earnout, I'm almost surprised it's that high. And if you drill down, I think it's really lower. So on and so forth. By the way, if you think about it, whenever you're looking at one of these studies and they say stock, we have to think, is it stock from a really little company? Illiquid, not so great. Stock from a huge company. So that makes a difference. Combinations. I don't have the combos here today. We can get that data. Obviously, we've got a huge database, so we can create that. Now, risk. Here's the indemnification survival periods. So we talked about how long does that warranty last. You can see that a year to year and a half, vast majority of them, that's where it falls. When I started practicing decades ago, there was my perception was there was a greater dispersion of this. And a little footnote, I say my perception. I think we all have perceptions of things, and it's interesting, I was talking with an economist from the University of Chicago, and they were doing a study, and they showed that the frequency that professionals and experts in their fields, doctors, whatever, valuation people, that they subjectively and incorrectly conclude things because they're not looking at data is phenomenally high. Like they get it wrong a lot. And so if you don't really look at objective data, you're probably getting it wrong because your data set can't be this big. My data set can't be this big. I hear it, maybe you do, many, many times, and if you're in banking, you'll hear it. Well, that's just not market. That's just not the way it is. This is how I see it. The reality is that person, I don't care who it is, as long as it's a human being, they've only seen so many deals, and it can't be that many deals. It can't be 1,500. It's not 1,500. I know that. And if it was 1,500, they can't keep it straight in their heads. So even I have a tendency, and all of us do, to sort of come up with patterns, pattern recognition. You have to validate it against these sorts of things. By the way, the ends, no survival, and indefinite, that we found relates often to companies that are being bought, even though they're private. And all the targets here are private. They have many, many shareholders, and there's often some structural dynamics that kind of put them on those extremes. Now, the maximum. This is a little, again, this is aggregate. So this is a little distorted because you have some big deals in this database. Again, you have 10 to 20%. And that's pretty, if you're dealing in the lower middle market, that's pretty low. You're right. No maximum. Again, there's usually stories there. Now you can see the spike about 100, 150%. Those are clearly the smaller deals right there. So that gives you a little bit of the distribution. Minimums. So here's 0 to 1%. It's probably 0.5%, 1/4% usually. By the way, one thing to note here, see how smushed together that is? This is the minimum. This is the trigger to pay your indemnification. And for those of us who work on deals, everybody talks about it, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty small issue. And as you can see, it's not a terribly controversial one. So if the guy or gal who's negotiating the other side is off this, that's a real red flag, kind of canary in the coal mine, that they really don't understand deals, because there's a strong consensus as to what to do here. Personal liability, this is interesting in and of itself, but it's also one mechanism used to kind of cut to some smaller deals. So when you look at the reps and warranties of the company only, and again, this is all kinds of deals. You have the company and the stockholders only. I know Mike had a car, I think you had a question about, shareholders making the reps and warranties. Interesting, yet we'll find out that on the end here, the company, the stockholders, those tend to be smaller deals, and the company only often are mergers. By the way, one thing I didn't mention, one aspect that drives us, I don't have the slide up here today, are the types of agreements. There's 3 basic types, like, the 3 flavors in Neapolitan ice cream. So there's merger agreements, stock purchase agreements, and asset purchase agreements. And I'm going to put mergers off to the side for the moment. But stock purchase, obviously, you buy the stock, and then asset purchase deals, you buy the assets. They tend to dominate smaller deals. And so when you have a stockholder who is giving the rep on an asset purchase agreement, that is a small, closely held deal. I'll talk about that. And this, by the way, we're able to measure the number of shareholders who are parties to agreements, and then we cross-correlated it with other dynamics. Interestingly, you often get one shareholder, and it's one, and there's no other shareholders signing. Again, correlates with some smaller deals. Termination fees, these tend to be with some larger deals. When you do get them, they tend to be pretty small. Now, some control issues. Non-competition covenant, again, I'm talking gross. You can see it's basically 50-50 whether or not there's a compete or non-compete. Kind of amazing that there's so many people, so many entities and deals that don't have a non-compete. But remember, there's some larger deals in this database and some very widely held deals in this database, and so those are not going to have non-competition covenants. Also, even if you have some smaller deals in the database, you've got biotech deals, technology deals from Silicon Valley with very sophisticated venture capital and institutional investors. Those deals tend to act more like public deals. Why am I talking about that? Again, let's go back to those earlier studies. If you don't make distinctions in those kinds of deals in your database, you've got garbage in, garbage out. So you really got to be careful about that. Dispute resolution, so you see the blue is the arbitration pie, everybody else is litigation. Just I'm going to step out of here, just a lawyer comment. I don't know, we actually did some cross sections on that arbitration, which tends to be smaller deals, which we'll see, but I got to tell you, it's a bad idea, really bad idea. It just for lots of reasons. And now that, I guess that's, if you give me another hour, I'll talk about that. Okay, economics. The deal sizes, just so you can see the deal sizes. This is now smaller deals. You can see it kind of correlates, even the smaller deals, similar industry characteristics as the larger ones. Now, this is a stock as a percentage of the total deal price. You can see what we've done it by deal set. We're starting to slice and dice here. And what you can see, and we saw this more clearly a couple years ago, is there's a correlation between buyer-friendly provisions and smaller deals. So what we literally have measured in many cases is the smaller the deal, the better the provision, the more friendly the provision is for the buyer. This chart shows it pretty clearly. So you get these really small deals at 1 to 5 million. They have a higher percentage of stock as consideration than the ones to the right, which would be cash, and they're larger deals. That kind of makes sense. Industry, it's a little harder to make that cut. We can talk offline, or you can contact me later. There's a way to slice and dice these, but it's a little harder. It's really that deal size that drives a lot of it. Now here's some insights on the covenants and controls. Now, this is a point. So I got this big blob of a database, and for a lot of our clients, they deal with sub $100 million deals, or even sub $25 million deals. How do we take that public database, and the Houlihan Lokey study and the other studies, they're great, but by the way, those other studies, they smush the billion dollar deal along with the small deal, and it's only 100 data points. Really, what good is that? It can't be. It's totally unpersuasive. It cannot be any good. Nice try, doesn't cut it. And maybe even, I think in a few years we look at this thing, it's going to be laughably primitive. That's my hope anyway. Kind of like watching TV in the 1940s. It's just a real gray picture here. But, so what we did was we took a look at asset purchase agreements. We took a slice there, which are about 30%, 30% of the database. Maybe 20%, and we took a look at smaller deals, and we took a look at shareholders who are making reps. Now, why did we do that? Bottom line is, if we do all three of those things, the theory is in the middle there, we've got closely held small businesses, not some weird high-tech business, because they're not going to be parties. We've really kind of isolated to the companies and the deals that you see here. I don't have all the data for it. We could get it for you. I don't have all of it today. But here's an example. So remember I had that dispute resolution. We had that pie wedge, it's like 15% did arbitration. So here it is by deal size. I sliced it here, closely held. I had that little sweet spot. So you could see arbitration's actually a lot more prevalent with smaller deals. That's kind of useful to know. Now I've got something that I can legitimately react to. In the deals that we often work on, arbitration is, for some reason, it's there in about 1/10 of them. For some reason, and if you're working on a bigger deal, even a 25 million or 100 million plus, forget it, off the table. But even a 25 million up, it's pretty small. Now, by the way, just an aside, it takes 1,500 deals to get just to this little group, even though there's about 120 or 150 in that pot. If you don't have a huge database, you can't get this kind of cross-section. Now, this is not competition agreements. Again, okay, now we start to see that the small deals, closely held, have the non-competitions predominate in that really small end. Now, what about the teeny-weeny deals? So what I did was I subdivided that 1 to 25 to 1 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 to 25. And in fact, there's a little pattern in there. The non-competition covenants are less prevalent, actually, in the super small deals, and they're more prevalent in kind of the medium size. You can think about why that would be. Maybe it's just literally a guy's retiring. They doesn't care about non-competes, whatever. But it opens the data and some insights. Now let's take a look at survival periods. Divided up survival periods for indemnification, that's that warranty again, a big deal. How long am I on the hook for cutting a check to reimburse something if something goes wrong with the company I sell? By the way, the axis, the vertical axis there, that's the number of years in the survival period, and of course the deal size. So you can see there's a slight correlation in deal size. It's not as strong as you think. One observation, I thought I saw Art Burtis here. There he is. Okay, when you and I were doing this a few years ago, this thing was way more skewed, where the bigger deals were much more buyer-friendly than it is in this slide here. And I've noticed in a couple of other slides, you'll see, it's flattened out a little bit. And I think what we think it is, and I can take a look at the data and figure it out, is that in the last 2 years, it's been a little more of a seller's market to some extent. And it's distorted this a bit. Now, yeah.
So in deals where you have multiple indemnification periods for different reps, how are you doing?
Yeah, great question. We do measure the exceptions. So the question is, for deals you have sort of a general indemnification survival period or whatever, it's like for all the reps and warranties, but it's very common to have exceptions. Well, except for taxes, except for environmental, except for ownership, that you have these carve-outs. We did identify those, and I just don't have them today, but we did, and they're fairly common. Those tend not to be as exceptional because, taxes is going to be the statute of limitations, and it's always there. The real variable there is that general one, but a good question. Interestingly, on the maximum, you can see here, it did follow that trend a little more. Bigger deals, more buyer-friendly. Smaller deals, bigger deals, more buyer-friendly, and then the smaller deals are more seller-friendly. So you can see here in the maximum, and this again this is by percentage of the purchase price. By the way, how I got this stuff, measure this, is what we did was, we did this presentation a few years ago. We had, each one of these has like their own chart. Like this 1 to 5 million has a chart, and it's got a normal distribution and bell curve, and it's beautiful. And man, it's a lot of information. So how do you compare like 8 different bell curves, which is what we were doing a couple of years ago, and people just started fainting or something. Yeah, hey Mike?
1 to 5, are you saying that 90% of the purchase price is the max?
Yeah, so here, I've just got to get to that. So here's, what we did was we took the median in the ranges, so the median identification maximum in these ranges. So it's a little bit of an arbitrary number, good question, but it's a way we can compare it. It's a way to get around this, literally the visual presentation problem of this. So if you're interested in diving down further, we dial up our database, and we can see the distribution on each one of those. So Mike, you'd see the answer to that question. So it's a very good question. Survival period again. We start to cut, slice it a little more. One thing I'll make, so there's some massaging of the information we had here. So we included indefinite periods here, so sort of those extremes. Asset purchase only, as we talked about, shareholders making the reps. So there's the distribution. You can see in the bigger deals, the survival period is actually, and ironically, a little longer. So if we, however, massage the data a little bit, and we take out certain deals, which I can go into more detail later if you'd like, it actually changes it. Here's a big takeaway from this slide. You tweak the data just a little bit, you throw in a few, you throw out a few, can really change the complexion of that number. So you have to think about it very carefully to make it comparable. Now, I've got a lot of data here, and I'm doing a lot of cuts here. Can you imagine if you have 100 deal database, and that's all you've got to work with? You can't do this. That's why it's garbage in, garbage out. And as I said, in a few years, I think we're going to look at this and I'm going to say that's pretty bad. What he was talking about is pretty bad stuff because we got a lot more data and a lot more cuts. This is a survival period. Again, same sort of thing. We've got the survival period here, for the small deals, the median. This is the median, sort of a weighted average median, which we have here. And you can see, ironically, it sort of goes up a little more. Now, when we go into when we tweak the data here, however, the pattern doesn't change. So sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And this just gives you a sort of a sense of how it all works when you tweak data here and there. Now, some trends. Got a few minutes left here. So I've done this for most years out of the last 10, not all, but most of them. And let's take a look at some trends. They don't really hit you over the head, to be honest with you. So I did 2004 through 2014. There's some missing years. Hey, we can't do it all, If you want more years, come over to my office and help me out. So this is the escrow amount, so as a percentage of the deal. So this is just, and then the median. So this is, how does it work? You see, it's, it was steady, it spiked in 2009, which by the way is a theme I've seen in some of these slides. 2008 and 9, weird, which we all know were weird years. It had some weird impacts on this. But they can kind of go both ways, which a lot of us subjectively know in the deals that we saw, which is, it was such a bizarre time that the deals that were on the market and being done were actually sometimes really good or sometimes really bad. In this case, a lot of escrow means that it was a buyer-friendly environment. Now, stock is payment, again, another buyer-friendly thing. Interestingly, you got a same sort of spike there. For some reason, 2004 was really high. Could be a quirk in the database, because otherwise it's kind of sort of the same. Okay, that's good to know. Indemnification survival periods. Okay, this is how long the indemnification survives. And again, I took the kind of the weighted average here. Interesting, look at 2008 again. Yeah, they kind of bump up. So we literally looked at independent cuts of the data, and they tend to be validating that something was going on there. And you'll see also things kind of drop down a little bit, making it more of a seller-friendly environment on the reps and warranties. Indemnification survival period. So this excludes, we took out some of the indefinites and zero survival and indefinite, and it tended to flatten out. But you know, I'm a big believer in starting at zero on these graphs and going up so it doesn't distort it. So that tends to make it look a little flatter. Promissory note, again, it's non-cash, so the higher that number, the more pro-buyer it is. The lower the number, the more pro-seller. So that contradicts a little bit of what we've been seeing. I'm going through these really fast, so if we want to talk about it later, that's fine. I put them all next to each other. So you can see it's sort of like, okay, some interesting patterns, some food for thought. We should certainly think about it, talk about it. And then let's just because I talk a lot with people like you about the trends. And think about it in contrast to other things, which I'll talk about in a moment. By the way, this is distribution of transactions by size. You see that the smallest deals in this database are getting kind of crammed down by some bigger deals as a percentage. This is a percentage. That could affect the data and what's going on in these other things here. So that's why it's so important to do the crosstabs. This is an interesting one thing. Cash paid at closing. This one suggests that over the years we're getting more cash, not less cash. One thing we can note, it's a weird graph, we can talk about it, it's hard to follow, but see 2008, there's a little spike, the amount of cash, which is that top color there, the little aqua color, it's shorter. Again, that's the one theme we've really seen again and again and again. 2008 and 9, weird deal years, and it's interesting to think about the impact that had on the terms and conditions of these deals. Deals without escrow, so the bottom is no escrow, so no escrow is a good thing for the seller, of course. Again, 2009, you've got a bit of a spike there, so something's going on. And then what I did was I did a slice of this for smaller deals. You could see again, 2009, you've got something going on, but then no escrows, again, more of a buyer, more of a seller-friendly environment in the last couple of years. So just a comment on efficient markets, because a lot of people come up and they say, well, what about, what's the trend? What's this? I got to look at my stock trends, whatever. I get I think, is everybody getting inundated by M&A trend studies in their email boxes? I don't mean to offend you if you're producing one of them, but I mean, are we getting the last year? What happened? It's almost like this data is like people, drinking out of a fire hose. So everybody's coming up and saying, hey, I saw this trend in this email. What happened? Well, let's think about this. So this is the S&P 500 profit margin. By the way, I put this up here just to show. So think about we had those muddy trends legally. We got some real clear spikes here. This is the S&P 500 and the profit margins of the companies. Just in a little geeky aside here. We thought, well, if we got the revenues of the company, but not the earnings of a company, how do we kind of measure the market cap of a company when it's buying, blah, 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 blah. We thought, we'll just look at margin analysis. Well then, margins are all over the place all the time. They change a lot. So the point being, very sensitive market, very sensitive stock market. There's some sectors, they're just that bottom line is all over the place. Unlike my trends, which were very blurry. This is a cut from an ACG Cap IQ presentation. This is just the middle market deals 2003, 2012. You've seen 8,000 of them lately. This is a Deloitte version. So they're kind of saying a little more muted than the crazy town of the S&P 500. But I think you could fairly say, you've got two of them. Those are pretty clear trends that we're seeing in some of the economics of this. So what can we conclude? And I think conclude logically. It's almost like the ocean. At the top of the waves, it's like a turtle at the top. It's going up and down, and that's the S&P 500. And then right below that, you've got kind of valuation of companies and the deal numbers of deals, the EBITDA multiples and all that. That's like sort of the fish floating at the top. They can feel a little bit up and down, whatever. The lawyers and legal documents, we're like the blind fish at the bottom of the ocean where it's really cold and dark, and we can't feel a thing. There could be a hurricane up there, and we barely feel it. And that's a little bit what's going on, ironically. There's some explanations for that. Legal stuff is hard to measure. There's a lot of impediments to transparency of information. So it totally makes sense that it's an inefficient, non-transparent market, and it just doesn't reflect what's going on as quickly. I say as quickly because I think, let's say starting today, going into the future, there will be people like me and more people like me, allied with people like you, they're going to get more and more information about what's really going on in the law, break down some of that inefficiency, and get some light into that otherwise dark area of deal making. So there's some transparency, efficiency, and ultimately fairness. And the key is efficiency here, because how many people think they spend too little money is spent on lawyers closing deals? And if I want to talk to you, yeah, okay, I'm going to give you my card after this. So that's a bit of a problem. And I'll wrap up here. This is sort of more of a dream here. I call it dynamic benchmarking. So we're doing all of these cuts on deals. And the thought is, okay, well, we got this term. That's really interesting. It's holdbacks this percentage. Indemnifications this median. Here's the chart. Well, but wait a minute. You can't think about, in theory, should you think about it in isolation? Because it's sort of like a husband and wife. It's like looking at the percentage of husbands that do dishes. Like, okay, that's interesting. But what about the husbands who do dishes but then don't do the laundry? Or do dishes, laundry, walk the dog, whatever. It's kind of a combination. Because maybe you have to look at it as it relates to other things. And if you don't, you're going to come to the wrong conclusions. So I thought, okay, that's really interesting. Well, how do we measure it? So what we did, actually, this is a couple of years ago, and I just didn't have it ready in time for when we taught. But and by the way, I don't even think it's ready for prime time now. So you're getting the beta version, and I'm going to go through these slides really fast. So we thought, well, how do we measure it? Let's assign like a fairness measure to each thing. You do the laundry twice a week, whatever. That's fair, not fair. That is indemnification amounts. We benchmark it. Is it fair? It's not. By the way, easier to do than you think, because if you look at that normal curve, you can kind of tell what's in the middle. So you can do it. So we scored all those things based on fairness. And pro buyer, pro seller, everything. And then what we did, we said, okay, let's do this. Let's take out one thing like indemnification. We'll take that out of the database and on one deal, and then see, is that fair relative to the pro buyer, pro seller nature of all the other things we left in? So the idea would be, if we take out doing the dishes, how does that relate to doing the laundry and walking the dog? So that's how we sort of do it. The theory would be, if you walk the dog and you do the laundry, then you get out of doing the dishes. So the theory is, if you have like a lot of non-cash and you have really pro buyer provisions, then maybe your indemnification maximum will be more pro seller provisions. Maybe your indemnification maximum will be more pro buyer, i.e. lower. So that's the thought. So how would that present itself? That would mean that the general fairness, again, doing the dishes and walking the dog, if you do 2 out of 3, you're going to get a break on the third. That's the theory. Because you just trade it off. So that means it should be negatively correlated. So that means the line goes sort of from the top left down to the bottom right. That's the negative correlation. If they're positively correlated, meaning if you walk the dog, you do the dishes, we should expect you to do the laundry as well, then it'd be positive. So it goes from the bottom left to the top. So I'm not going to bother asking questions what people think. This is what we found. They're positively correlated. So if you wind up and you walk the dog and you do the dishes, you're probably going to have to do the laundry as well. And this is a good example. We got, by the way, R-squared for you geeks. That's actually not a bad R-squared. So that's the earn out. That's what we found. So again, we took the earn out on one out of it, like washing the dishes, and looked at everything else. We did it for indemnification maximum. Line's not quite as steep, but same thing. And a survival period and indemnification maximum. So this is what we found. Now, I cheated a little bit here. We did it with a bunch of other things, and some of them actually were negatively correlated. We just couldn't, and we were like, this doesn't look good. I can't show this to these people. So I didn't. But actually, these were interesting slides. You know, call me next time. We'll see what we find out. But so what that suggests is sort of you have to ask yourself, okay, if I'm negotiating a deal, but it kind of makes sense. If I'm, you know, my leverage is such, I kind of get locked in on an indemnification period, on an escrow period, or the form of non-cash consideration. It kind of lines up. Now, what's the insight as a deal maker I can gain from that? Which is, I shouldn't expect too much if I'm getting pushed back on everything else, and I shouldn't concede too much either. So, if I'm on the other side, if I'm getting a good deal, don't give up on other things. You may on the margins, but you're not swimming against the current. The data's telling you that's the way it usually works. So I'll just wrap up with a couple of uses of this stuff. I call it thinking out of the box, but not out of the building. So we want creative ways to get deals done, but they can't be so weird that people don't understand them, they're not efficient, so on and so forth. Benchmarking definitely helps. I call it inner peace. A lot of people say, oh, this is great. I'm going to take this benchmarking study and I'm going to show it to the lawyer. The deal lawyers in the room will understand. I'll show it to the lawyer on the side, and in theory, they're going to go, oh, wow, Perry Mason moment. You're right, I'm wrong, you win, I lose. Yep. How many times does that happen? Never, ever. It's just like, don't even, you can say it, they'll never get a concession. You can say it to them and they'll never do it, they'll never concede. But what you can do is inner peace. Talk to your team. Talk to the owner and say, look, Mr. Owner, you're really out there on this one. And I'm going to show you how. That you can do. And that sometimes you can talk your clients off the ledge. Waste not. At least you can cut the deal faster. Your deal's more likely to close. Your legal fees will be lower. The whole thing is just going to be great question. Be great information. I can't think of a real easy way to get it at the moment because while you get a lot of transparency on the buyer, you don't get the same transparency in the seller. However, never say never. There might be ways to do it, like looking at public-to-public deals, and then therefore make some conclusions about private deals. Sometimes there's ways you triangulate. So there's a thing about good question like that, and then you look at the data. It's just like it's like fixing a car. Sometimes you just have to think about, how am I going to fix that part even though I don't have all the tools? You can get there, but you have to do it a little directly. But directly, I can't think of the way to do that. Yep.
Yeah, all your database is all public on this one, private. You guys thought about making different database and private?
Yeah, I mean, would that be great? Yeah, and the answer is yes. There are some you can get through various ways. And the Houlihan Lokey study is private. I think. Yeah, I don't know if it's private. That may be private. Here's the problem with that. How do you get the agreements? You have to basically have people give them to you. Now, there's a confidentiality problem. So if you're Houlihan Lokey, how do you connect the economic information with the legal information and say you're not blowing your confidentiality? It's a real obstacle, number one. Number two, just getting a quantity of private deals is difficult, but there's a will, there's a way. I think you will ultimately see that, but right now it's too difficult and expensive to get them in any reasonable quantity.
One more question.
Yep.
It's really great work. I did not know that the ABA study didn't have that many deals in it. I thought it was really much more expansive. Are you willing to make your slides available to us?
I'll make a variation of them available, so we'll talk about it. Otherwise, give me a call, because some of this stuff was obviously really, really hard to produce. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk and we'll certainly make a lot of it available. But I can't guarantee all of it, because I have to talk to my partners too, because the firm made an investment in this. So, yep, hey, Art.
Do you think the public markets are, I call it, more efficient on addressing terms versus the private markets? Do you have any insight based on, we look at these studies and they all gravitate in certain ways. What's your view on that?
Yeah, no, good question. So the question is, would public market deals, I assume public to public, effectively.
Public buying private.
Public buying private? Yeah, these are public buying private.
Right.
Yeah.
So based on what you look at here, if you look at some of the private studies, is there a view in any sense that the view of how the public companies approach the deals sort of...
Yeah, like compare
compared to the private?
Yeah, so let's say, take the Houlihan-Lokey study compared to this one, and is there a difference we could, I couldn't tell you because the Houlihan-Lokey study is just, there's just not enough in it. It's not a bad study, it's just there's not enough in it. Fair question. I would suspect the answer is probably, but not definitely, not definitely.
Are you going to be around a little bit?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, appreciate it. Absolutely, I'll be around any more questions.